So during that time frame, since the geopolitical issues were getting heightened, there was tension. What's China going to do? Taking Taiwan and other areas, opportunities for them. At least that's what they thought. So I learned quick I needed to source within mainland China. I think what it'll do, it'll force us to be a little bit get smarter than what we were. We're going to learn just as we did during COVID and what we do and how we source things, right? It forced us to become better business people, more efficient business people. It will help us to streamline our portfolios and probably streamline some of the processes and everything.
Welcome to Farm to Fork the Innovators. I'm David Maloney, president of Datum FS. With over 40 years in the food supply chain, we explore the stories and strategies transforming how we produce and serve food. Our guest innovator today is Tom Healy, a seasoned international sourcing executive with extensive experience working with major consumer packaged good manufacturers and restaurant chains. In this episode, we're talking tariffs, folks. And that includes an overview of the latest Trump tariffs announced last week, how a major U.S.-based restaurant brand adapted its sourcing strategy in response to tariffs from the first Trump administration, best practices for sourcing in a trade war, both domestically and internationally, and which commodity markets and products could be most affected by the new tariffs. So buckle up, hit that subscribe button, and let's harvest progress together. This is Farm to Fork the Innovators, where the future of the food supply chain starts with this episode. All right, Tom, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, pleasure to be here and spend some time with you, David. Yeah, so given my background, I have somewhat of a unique experiences and education as for a supply chain person. So I hold degrees in animal science and then graduate degrees in genetics and food science. And I've done everything truly from farm to table, which is somewhat unique when you're talking to various supply chain leaders over the years. And I've done everything. I've raised the animals. I've done research and development. I've done technical sales. I've done national account sales, international sales. I've led supply chain teams around the world and led international R&D teams. So, my claim to fame is this: I just know enough to be dangerous in all this activity that's going on these days.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about tariffs, folks, right? As you probably guessed from the intro with the Trump administration announcing tariffs last week, we thought it would be very appropriate to bring Tom in with his expertise, particularly international sourcing for some major brands, including Dairy Queen, Heinz, Jack Links, etc. So tell us a little bit. You talked about sourcing internationally and leading international teams. What does that involve? Like, maybe you can kind of set the table for us briefly for everybody.
And basically, what I like to look at it is we all know about domestic sourcing. Those of us are involved with sourcing locally or regionally, if you will. You take that, right, and you just amplify it by 20-fold because each country is unique in itself. There's different geopolitical issues in trading, not only just with the United States, but within certain regions like Southeast Asia and China. It could be, whatever the trade barriers are or issues are with respective countries. So it just amplifies the challenges that you have. So what I've learned in doing this, and like you said, David, I've done this with Heinz, Jack Links, and Dairy Queen, is that I've learned really fast that you need to locally source. So try to get something within a country or within a region that has fair trade, if you will, and limited tariffs or regulations on there. And it gives you the ability to move things around. You still need to be cognizant, though, that you have to have dual sourcing, because what if, right? What if a border trades? What if there's a natural disaster or something happens out there that's beyond our control, which happens all the time in supply chain? So you have to continue to have dual sourcing and everything. And I found over the years that most major brands don't always do this. And it's a negative to them because ultimately they get caught, just like with this tariff situation. Some will have some supply chains disrupted of that. Now, one thing going for us this time, from a supply chain perspective, we all live COVID, and we also have bad memories of that and bad dreams of that.
Right.
So we learned how to be a little bit more nimble and hopefully smarter in the supply chain things. And supply chains changed drastically during that time, where the broadline distributors, exporters, importers, wielded all the power during that time. Where we as buyers or end users were dependent upon them, and we were at the mercy of what they could do or what they wanted to do for all of us. So keeping that in play, you have to look and you have to be able to source and look for multiple ways and means of moving things. Planes, trains, and automobiles come in all the time, especially with international. And it's realized more here domestically. We just don't know it because we take it for granted and it goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you were at Dairy Queen in Trump administration version 1, right?
Correct.
With those first tariffs. Can you kind of walk us through what that experience was like? Now, Tom was the VP of International Supply Chain, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I had 26 countries under me.
Yeah. And by the way, I heard on a recent podcast, Dairy Queen, I think has the oldest presence internationally of any U.S.-based restaurant chain.
Yeah, it'd be down in Colombia of all places. So over 60 plus years.
Yeah,
we've had the same franchise.
Very interesting. So anyways, expound, what was it like? Trump Tariff 1 back in while you were at Dairy Queen.
Yeah, so Trump Tariff 1, basically, he focused all his energy and his business method to his madness, right? With his business act, focused on China, basically, trying to get fair trade there because that was our largest trade partner, both import and export. And we relied on them for our economy. They relied on us for their economy. So during that time frame, since the geopolitical issues were getting heightened, there was tension. What's China going to do? Taking Taiwan and other areas, opportunities for them. At least that's what they thought. So I learned quick. I needed to source within mainland China. So it took me several years. Well, even during COVID, I continued that journey to source everything that we could possibly get to. Where I was probably, before I started that initiative, I was probably 40% within mainland China. So 60-40. And then when I retired in June of 23, I was 95% sourced to mainland China. So it drove me, right, to address that through the tariffs just within that particular country. The rest of the countries, he really wasn't focused on, or the administration really wasn't focused on. So they weren't impacted at all, which leads us to today. Right now, the entire world is impacted by Trump Tariff 2.0.
So I'd assume, since it was mostly focused on China, that a lot of the sourcing was being done from the United States, or some of the sourcing, at least some was being done in the United States into China?
Correct, yes. Like all the store equipment generally came from the United States. Some of the stabilizer in our ice cream was only manufactured in the United States. I also learned in my international experiences that even though a company has manufactured in the United States, Canada, Europe, China, most of these companies they operate, they say that they're one big happy family, but they operate within each region, within each country autonomously because they're their own business unit, and they don't necessarily work together, and you can't necessarily transfer a formula from United States to China, even though it's the same company.
Interesting.
Which makes it very interesting. A lot of times we had to go out and match, right, and reinvent the wheel to get the same type of a product, even though we could potentially be working with the same company.
So if I hear you, that best practice, and maybe we don't even call it a best practice, it's just what you had to do, and that's fair enough,
Correct.
Was to be able to become locally sourced within China.
Yep. So the few things that were outside it, I had to make sure that they were good business partners with China, and there weren't any geopolitical issues or tensions going on between those countries, and we pull those in so that we could, again, basically, though we considered ourselves sourced within country.
Did that impact the price or the quality of the product, or were you able to match it pretty well or get to your specs?
Generally speaking, from a quality standpoint, we still drive, right? We have quality standards around the world, and we hold every supplier to the same quality standards. So they could meet those by that. And generally speaking, probably 9 times out of 10, there was additional cost savings because we took out even just the logistics piece of everything.
Right.
And then the cost, right? Everybody goes to China anyways because the labor is more affordable and everything. So generally speaking, there was some significant cost savings in there. And then I didn't have to have 6-month lead time and have, or 8 or 10 months inventory of something sitting there waiting for it to be used. and tying up a franchisee's capital.
Interesting. Good stuff. All right. So, I mean, I'll ask you the question, what's different this time with the Trump tariffs? I mean, you mentioned it earlier, right? But what's different? How should supply chains be thinking about this, right?
I think we all need to, so the main thing, it's different because he went after every country that trades with the United States this time was given some type of tariff increase. So that's the thing that's different. So in the realm of thing, it impacts more things, but we have to take a step back, right? It's not the sky is falling, the world's coming to an end anywhere. It'll be a slow impact on things. I think when they're talking to a lot of people out there, they still think that Mexico and Canada were hit with 25% across the board tariffs. That's not true. We have the US Mexico Canadian trade agreement in place. So most of the items that we buy on a day to day basis and trade with them fall under that guideline, and we're not assessed anything. Basically, what he went after with those two at the end of the day when he did this on Tuesday was the car and auto industry. And that's the only thing. So I think we just need to, take a little bit of pause here and step back and see how things pan out. I would estimate that a lot of these countries will negotiate, and tariff conversations are going on, I'm sure, 24/7 with our administration today. And a lot of things will soften and come back to us much sooner rather than later on all that. So will there be some supply chain hiccups? I'm sure there will be, but I don't know that it's going to be a crisis situation in a 911 and that we just have to, do whatever we have. I think what it'll do, it'll force us to be a little bit smarter than what we were. We're going to learn just as we did during COVID and what we do and how we source things, right? It forced us to become better business people, more efficient business people. It will help us to streamline our portfolios and probably streamline some of the processes and everything. It's to me, since and the HHS, Secretary Kennedy, he wants to clean up ingredient declarations, right? So most of your food additives, food chemicals, spices, flavors come from Asia zone or abroad or not there. So this may be an opportune time to go in there and clean up these ingredient decks and remove things that we don't need today because technology can do what once we needed a food additive to do in there today. So I think there's going to be some wins out of this too that we just don't realize when we stop and think. We just hear tariff, supply chain disruptions. A lot of people have systems built up, and people knew these tariffs were coming, so it gave them time to forward buy, if you will, and keep the pipeline coming and moving on there. And I said, I really think a lot of these will get worked out before there's a lot of supply chain disruption. Will there be some price variation? For sure. I mean, there always is when all this noise takes place.
So just to be clear on the United States, Mexico-Canada agreement, as we call it in the United States, I learned that in Mexico they call it something else, and in Canada they call it something else. But that key produce items like tomatoes and avocados coming from Mexico, folks, roughly 90% of the avocados we consume in the United States come from Mexico.
Correct.
Are exempt. They are
Correct.
exempt.
Yep, they're in that trade agreement, so they're not going to endure anything extra.
Now, I think it is a fluid situation, so we can't guarantee that. Maybe even we're recording this on a Friday afternoon. This is going to air Monday morning, folks. So I can't guarantee you by the time you hear this, right, that's true.
Exactly.
It's a Friday at 4:08 p.m. Eastern time on April 4th. They're exempt. Okay.
Exactly.
And probably most important, maybe even more importantly for the industry, feeder cattle imports are exempt, right, from Mexico.
Correct. There's been some animal health issues, which has limited the cattle been moving up there since last fall. And those have been resolved. So the cattle are starting to move again. And coming back into the States and getting into our feed yards and backgrounding operations. So which is a good thing because we need those cattle. And they need that as an outlet too to move their cattle and merchandise for their economy.
Yeah. So, and just to give you some perspective as a bench line, folks, when those cattle started to resume, the USDA bumped their beef production forecast up for 25 by 4%. Actually, 4%. So it's a big number, right? It's a sizable number.
I've seen varied numbers, anywhere from 8 to 15% of the calves that are backgrounded on an annual basis come out of Mexico.
There you go. There you go.
which would correlate into what you're saying based on the weights of the cattle and the harvest time for the calendar year.
Yeah. So one of, and I would assume probably at Heinz, Jack Link's and Dairy Queen. I mean, one of the markets I'm most concerned about, or the tariff that I'm most concerned about, is the 10% tariff on Australia and New Zealand, and how that could affect lean beef trim imports, or the price of lean beef trim imports. Can you first explain to us what lean beef trim is, how it's used by the food service industry, why we need it, and then what is your take on that import? Because folks, roughly, I think it's somewhere in the vicinity of 75% of lean beef trim imports come from those two countries, Australia, New Zealand. And then a lot of the rest that comes from South America, which also have tariffs. So,
yeah. So great question. So lean beef, we all like hamburgers, right? When we're coming into grilling season and everything. So in order to make that hamburger patty, we need lean beef. We can't just grind up all these cattle that have been corn fed through our feedlot situation. We have to take a certain percentage of the B50s, which is 50% fat, 50% lean, and then we call the lean beef or beef 90s. So they're 90% lean, 10% fat. A lot of the cattle in Australia and New Zealand are grass fed, so they're typically leaner. Just and down in Central and South America just as well. They don't traditionally go into a feed yard, so those animals are leaner by nature, and then the breed makeup too also makes them leaner. So it's a combination. So we need that lean beef. We're at 75-year low of cattle inventory and our cow herds. That additional tax on the Australians, people really don't seem to be too nervous about it. I think that they can offset that, and I think that'll equilibrate. In some of the articles that I've read since Tuesday, one thing to note, they've had some weather issues over in Australia, and they've had to liquidate some of their cow herds too, which would be these 90s. So they could have some limitations on the number of animals that'll be harvested this year as well, which could drive the price as well, because we consume a lot. We're the number one trading partner on beef, and I would expect them. And they don't generally buy our beef. We're net importers of Australian, and it's not an equal fair trade as far as volume wise going on. So I think though that meat will continue to flow. I know talking to some of the Brazilian packers over the last 30 to 60 days, their focus is on the United States, even with an additional 10% duties. They have a preferred country status. It was a 24.6% tariff already. And then the additional 10%, they still think that there's opportunity due to the shortage of beef in the United States, that there are an ample opportunity, and they would like 50% of their imports or exports from their country going into the United States.
Yeah, interesting. And so basically, is it fair to say, Tom, we have a deficit of lean beef trim in the United States to make
Correct.
all the hamburger and other products that
Correct.
we use. And so we need to source that internationally. You already have, folks, lean trim prices basically at record highs.
Yeah.
And, the imported market has typically been trading about 15 to 20% below, just to give you some perspective, the fresh domestic market. So there is some room there, to Tom's point, with the tariffs, right? And plus, you got to figure, is it fair to say some of these countries, even if they don't negotiate, are going to absorb some of that cost?
They will, because they want to keep the product flowing, right? They need it as an outlet or reason. There's not, the Chinese are huge buyers they're huge buyers of a lot of countries' products, but they've been selling a lot of beef, or buying a lot of the Brazilian and Argentine beef from Paraguay and Uruguay beef for the last year or so. So they've been focusing on that market and the United States just due to the short. And we got to remember the life cycle of an animal, right? For us to start rebuilding our supply side of the beef is 2 years, and we haven't started a rebuilding cycle yet, based on the farm reports that I'm seeing and listening to, and the cattle inventory numbers when they do them on a monthly basis on that. So it's fun. one thing that's probably working into our favor, right? That generally speaking, the fuel prices are coming down everywhere. So freight is coming down, which will help, David, as to what you were talking to. It'll help them absorb some of those costs so they can get some advantages on the freight side to offset any extra tariff they would have to pay to bring it in. Another thing that you got to consider is that there's quotas from every country on here, and they're limited to what and how much that they can sell. And the United States does it just to protect our own farmers and ranchers when it can. Now, exceptions can be made in time of shortages like this and this tariff. I'm sure the quotas will come up when they're talking about tariffs as well, because they'll want more. They'll want more business opportunity, and I wouldn't be surprised if we don't grant that to certain countries.
Is it fair to say there can be a tendency, at least in the past, for countries to figure out some workarounds, whether that's to move product into Mexico first before it coming to the United States, or China has moved, from what I understand, China's moved a lot of product into Vietnam.
I was just going to say that, from Trump 1.0 tariff, that's what they did. They just repositioned it, and then they bankroll all these other countries where operations are that have better, easier trade agreements, I guess is the best way to do it, to push it through. Yes, so that's done all the time as well.
So it sounds like what you're saying, it's not black and white here, folks, right? I mean, it's not. You can't say, okay, everything's going to go up 25% or 50% or 10%.
No.
Right?
No. Yeah.
And especially with animals and production, I mean, they want to keep those plants running.
Correct.
Right? They don't want to idle them. So they got to sell that product. Right? So that would play into it as well, right? I mean, like you said, they want to keep that product moving in the supply chain.
Exactly. I mean, this is just a chess game, right? Now, before it's primarily just with China. Now it's the entire world with big trading partners, and that's what makes everybody nervous.
Is there another commodity market or item in the food product in the food supply chain you're worried about with this kind of, let's call it, tariff trade war?
I mean, I think no, because they're going to go after the big ones, right? So it's all your grain commodities, all your animal proteins and dairy products and that. So the dairy is one that they tend to focus on too, and so that maybe that's the one. If anything, they go after the dairy just because of the nature of it and the usages of it and the shelf life of the thing. That's one thing at commodities and food items we're at a disadvantage, right? Because we have a ticking time bomb with the shelf life of these products too. It's not like you can make a widget and put it on the shelf and just ride this thing out for a year. Yeah.
And by the way, folks, we're importing, to Tom's point, we're importing a lot more butter in the United States than we were 5-10 years ago. And a lot of that is that nice Irish Gold or European butter, which is a higher fat content.
And that's the premium.
Yep. That we have, as a society, have become attracted to, let's say. So dairy, that's a great call out there. As far as retaliatory tariffs, do you have what's your big concern? Is it, I mean, if there are retaliatory tariffs, the idea would be, I mean, we do export a lot of the products, lean trim, obviously, produce, not as much, but we export a lot of the major products that the United States buys, whether that's food service in the United States buys, whether that's chicken, pork, soybean oil, wheat, right, for flour, etc. I mean, is there, and the idea, the thought process, well, if China's not going to take as many soybeans, or they're not going to take as much wheat, if the world's not going to take as much wheat, how does that impact? I mean, I would think that'd be a little bit bearish, at least for the markets here domestically.
Yeah, I think so. I think we'll see some of that right now. People have been trading down, right? Because as the beef prices escalate, they trade down and keep trading down. Well, if we don't have the 90s for the hamburgers, which is a cheaper, more affordable cut of meat, they're going to go more to poultry. I mean, poultry always is the cheapest source of protein. So they may target, right, as the industry tries to shift as a short-term solution, they may try to hit some additional tariffs on that. Now, one thing about the the poultry is that Westerners or Americans, specifically in Canadians, we all like the white meat, right? So all the front half of the bird is the white meat, the back half is the dark meat, and that's what we export primarily to all the Asian countries. I think we'll probably see some new trade agreements with some of these Southeast Asian countries and some of these African countries that we don't realize or have today, and figure out how to move product into some of these newer markets on there. But I really don't. I just don't think it's that gloom and doom, because net, China has to feed their people, and they have to import everything to feed their people. They are not self sufficient. Their biggest ally, arguably, right, would be Russia, and they're distracted with the ongoings in Ukraine, so they have to outsource it. Also taking place with all this, we still have Mother Nature to deal with, right, on all these proteins and crops and everything else. So where's the droughts going to be? Where's the excessive rain going to be? Where's the disease going to be? We still dealing with high path here in the United States in the poultry. They got African swine flu in Europe. We had the screw worms in the cattle in Mexico. So there's always these natural elements that come into play here that can impact these things as well.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff. So for a brand here in the United States, what would the top 1 or 2, 3 tips you would give them right now today regarding these tariffs?
Well, I think is you just need to review what your coverage is, right? On your top 10 ingredients or items that you purchase today, and then determine how far out that you have coverage on. I think they all need to talk with their marketing teams, right, and see what type of LTOs that they have coming up, and or products that are in the pipeline to develop and launch, and what's the risk of being able to source everything that's with those in there today. And then I think they need to take advantage, right? There's a lot of market information out there. I think they need to do a deep dive into the market analysis. There's a lot of different subscriptions that you can subscribe to, and I think they need to take it, not just get the data and see a number and look at a forecast, but what's impacting all those numbers? How is the fuel impacting it? How is the weather impacting it? What's the strength of the U.S. dollar out there in the global marketplace, and these other currencies that we're trading back? I think they need to think about employing hedging as a good mechanism on there. I would work with my strategic partners, vendors, to hedge, to mitigate my risk and control my input costs. This is an ample time, if you're not doing it, to learn about that and probably start doing that, because we're in an inflationary period. Even without the tariffs, we're still in an inflationary period.
Yep. And by the way, folks, we can help you. Right? We can help you. So, all right. So as we kind of wind this down, my thought process here is more so the concern for the restaurant industry is the consumer. If you look at the grain markets, they've performed since the announcements on Tuesday much better than the equity markets, all right? Or Wednesday, whatever day it was. How does the restaurant industry adjust to this? Maybe a consumer that is concerned, right? Doesn't have a clear picture of where we're going to be 30 days, 60 days, 6 months from now, a year from now, right? What does the restaurant industry do in that situation? And for matter, a food manufacturer, CPG food manufacturer too.
Yeah, so that's where your strategic partnerships come into play here with your CPG manufacturer. What's the consumer going to spend their money on? This weekend, I'm sure people aren't going to be running out to eat, given the way the stock market has done the last couple of days. They're nervous, right? They're just taking money out of their pocket, the free cash. Time will tell. So I think from a brand standpoint, if I'm in the restaurant and I'm a franchisee or working with a major brand, keep doing what we're doing. Show the value meal, show what they get the bang for the buck, and keep doing that. And then if you're the CPG company, still try to create as much value as you can on the retail shelf, and try to minimize, right, what if any price increases that you have to pass on. I think you need to be a little bit more transparent than what the industry has been on both sides of it. I think they expect it, right? So you can get away with it. But if you do it one time. Don't keep doing it multiple times, because you're going to get blowback whenever you do it. But if you're transparent and saying, just like Waffle House came out and said, right, due to the surcharges in the eggs. I'm going to charge 50 cents for every egg that you buy in your meal. They were transparent about that versus just adding it on when you got your bill. So I think we need to be more transparent on all sides of it and try to keep the consumer comfortable enough to know that we're trying to manage the cost the best that we can. It's the same quality product. We don't want to skimp on anything, but we want to offer you the same goods for the same price for as long as we can. But sooner or later, we may have to pass on some costs.
Well said. Well said. All right, Tom. Well, great stuff here and very timely. And I want to thank you for being on the show.
Oh, I appreciate it. And like you said, Monday morning may be a whole new deal. We have so whatever we just discussed, it may be out the window.
Well, hopefully not, but we'll see.
Time will tell.
Yeah. And that brings us to the end of another insightful journey through the fields of innovation on Farm to Fork, the Innovators. It's an honor to have you listen. If you found today's episode as fascinating as we did, don't forget to share it with a friend, write a review, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. Farm to Fork is not just a podcast. It's a community of forward thinkers and change makers. Your thoughts and ideas matter to us. Reach out on social media or through our website, datumfs.com, and be a part of the ongoing conversation. As we wrap up today, remember, the future of the food supply chain is in our hands. Stay curious, stay innovative, and let's continue growing together. Until next time, this is David Maloney signing off from Farm to Fork, the Innovators. Thank you for being a part of this community. See you in the next episode.